Hi everyone. I am so happy to see all your faces this evening. I'm Kathy Park Hong. I run the illustrious Holloway Poetry Series, and I'm so excited tonight because Robyn Schiff will be reading tonight. I was just talking to Robyn. We've known each other for so many years that we can't even, I don't even know when. I can't, actually maybe I don't want to give that away because I don't give away my age, but so yes, we've known each other many years, and she's a brilliant poet, and her books are for sale in the back. Please buy a copy. Please support your local bookstore. Please support Pegasus. I also want to tell you that the Holloway series after Robyn, we will have Monica Yoon, another brilliant poet, who will be reading on October 9th, 5:30. So I just wanted to give you a little brief rundown of the schedule for this evening. We have Camille Santana Considine, who will be introducing our grad student Oriana Tang, and I'm really excited about that. And then our grad student Gwen Muron will be introducing Robyn Schiff. So I hope you are as thrilled as I am. Please also sign up for our email list. And without further ado, I introduce Camille.
Last July, when we were both out of the country on language study and settling into our respective summer universities, Oriana texted me, quote, "I'm definitely losing my English, but not sure if my Chinese is improving." This past July, I found her under a tree and asked her the difference between a set and a sequence of poems. She looked up from her copy of England in 1819, the one by Chandler, not Shelley, and said, "In a sequence, the order matters." Some of these poems have an order between them. There are palinodes, one has an absent pair, but they don't all belong to the same sequence. Instead, they form a set of questions about the construction of space. How is a lover like a roofless cathedral? How do you know if you're being, quote, led to slaughter or to pasture? Can you see the details off in the distance? In these painterly landscapes, experience happens, quote, at a crossroads between the formal and the material. In one instance, dawn is pink, and the mountains are no longer features, but, quote, a landscape in and of themselves. And then the light falls, and their contours become indistinct. Quote, our view has shifted, our attention has scrolled, and we have been moved. In 1714, Leibniz wrote that, quote, monads have no windows through which something can enter or leave. For Benjamin, the arcades were a place of truth because they had no windows. And so in them, one's gaze moved in the way that one's gaze would move through a panorama. Oriana's first poem has a panoramic gaze that looks through, quote, the bus window into, quote, the window, and then recalls another, quote, window. Her landscapes are always alive with this chiastic movement. Please join me in welcoming Oriana.
This mic makes me very nervous. Thank you, Camille, for this introduction that I think reads my poems more generously than they merit. Thank you to Kathy and to Catherine for having me, and thank you to Robyn for this captive audience. I'm really excited to be reading today. Olana. Olana is, you don't really need to put this context, but Olana is the name of the estate of Frederick Edward Church. Sorry. I saw the purple house through the bus window, and had spent months wondering how it would be to live there, varnishing the floors with the windows thrust open, buying sunflowers to arrange in tin buckets on the porch. Some seasons went by. When I returned to the area, the house was gone, or it had been demolished, or we'd taken a route from which it couldn't be seen. All that was left was the studio of the 19th century painter whose work had made the region famous, and, across the bridge, the fantastical castle designed and built by his protege, who, having in late life lost use of his hands to arthritis, directed workers to cultivate his estate so that from the window of his parlor he could look at his land as patrons presumably looked at his paintings, parting the velvet curtains behind which they were displayed, fidgeting with the dials of their opera glasses. Such had been the precision of his brush. All that was past now. He rang the maid to stir cream into the coffee for him, and because today was a painful one, to help bring the cup to his mouth. From deep within the house came the sound of his wife picking out counterpoint on the piano. If he was lucky, the sun would burn off the mist that had gathered overnight above the trees, and seeing the vista at sunset would be like moving across a gallery containing a dozen canvases. The next two poems are a pair, and they are about the philosopher Immanuel Kant. But I can't guarantee that the philosophy in them is correct. You may simply have to assume that the speaker is a bad reader of philosophy. In California. Why at the grocery store is the handsome man in basketball shorts removing each fig from its berry basket to evaluate it for ripeness and blemish? Embarrassed by my comparative hastiness, I remove myself to the celery, only to find an employee tearing off outer stalks to reveal more appealing parts. Am I so wrong to believe one should take what one is given, lest there be nothing left for the rest of us? Or does my attitude reveal an insufficiently robust understanding of the will? The relation of the actions to the effect hoped for, without which nothing, at least in California, would ever change. Not the seasons, which begin and end with the construction on my street, or the construction, which never ends. So, one hopes, one needn't receive. Tell me you're happy, then, with your figs, black mission, artichokes, dog, probably blonde girlfriend, blinded momentarily at the crosswalk before the blue house with the dirty siding by the pink dogwood flowering relentlessly. Palinode. It's the dogwood I'm interested in, not the question of the will. Though the dogwood itself is a question of will, whether it flowers so fluently because it is loved better than the house with its sunken porch and smudged windows, or because it must flower, another's care be damned. If anyone lives there, do they look upon the dogwood, cursing its resilience, wishing it reflected better their attitude towards their property? Or are they relieved they are not so wayward as not to be deserving of a gift? This longing to distinguish what is willed from what is given. Kant, only twice in his life leaving Königsberg, should have come to California to develop his concept of purposiveness. Though it is true that from the windows of his study, he daily gazed in a meditative manner at a tower until its sight became disturbed by the growth of a stand of poplars. These, he, perplexed, ordered axed. Nothing given freely. Thinking about a poem Linda Gregg once wrote about being led like a lamb, Only I can't find it, which makes me think it's an idea I have about a poem I think Linda Gregg would write, given my shallow understanding of who she is and what she might know of life. In the poem of my imagination, the speaker finds herself before her lover, led like a lamb, or perhaps led by him like a lamb, or led like a lamb towards him as though he were slaughter or pasture. Of course, to be a lamb means not to know what it is to which one is being led. But to be a lamb means also not needing to know. Rather bowing to the other's knowledge, even to the lion's, whose red maw in its knowing can only ever break gently the crucial bones of the neck. The lamb's strength lies in not knowing it is nothing, which allows it to wear its nothing lightly. Nothing hidden in the dappled fields at dusk. Nothing given freely can destroy the one who gives it. I wanted to find this poem so I could show it to you, so it could say for me, do you know what it is you are, or what I have given to you, or what you can do to me now? And this last poem that I'm going to read is the first poem of a long sequence that I've been working on for, I think, over a year at this point. But the rest of it is not fit to be seen, so here's just the first one. Sunset over the San Gabriel Mountains. Did you know that off in the distance, those are the San Gabriel Mountains? Covered in uneven shrubbery like badly shaven heads. At this hour, from the road, they seem less like a feature of the landscape than a landscape in and of themselves. By landscape, I mean that the windows of the car frame the sight of the mountains the way trees frame a vista in a painting by Lorraine. Between the trees, grass, river. The grass trimmed so evenly it approaches velvet. Above them, it's daybreak, the sky chopped with pink. Blessing declared painting a medium that exists in space rather than in time. Yet with time, a spray of oleander becomes visible. Then the coarse furs on the backs of the oxen. A breeze ruffles the surface of the water, carrying with it the chime of a cowherd's bells. The smell of dew and cedar rises from the wood. Dusk is now falling in our painting of the mountains. The contours of the ridges are becoming indistinct. Soon it will be dark, but our view has shifted. The road, in bringing us towards the mountains, has reduced their scale and so depleted their ambiguity. In the new landscape, tall weeds sway in the wind. Clouds of dirt come into and out of the frame of the windows. Still, not everyone cares so much for windows. For example, the Chinese, who attend to their landscapes in the form of a scroll. Thank you.
Such a wonderful reading, Oriana. I am honored and delighted to be introducing Robyn Schiff. In 2019, I had the intense good fortune to be in Robyn's workshop on long poems at the University of Iowa. One of my favorite moments from that time, and one that I think is especially emblematic of Robyn's poetic and pedagogical capaciousness, was our final poetry reading. Set in the Iowa Museum of Natural History's immersive 1914 Bird Room, a multi-sensory cyclorama of albatrosses, preening boobies, and tufty, unfledged gulls. Their squawks and courtship squalls played from a hidden speaker, trilling into the sonic patterns of our poems, variously making clangor, mischief, unison. And I think this choice to stage our culminating poetry reading in such a sensorially full, polyphonic context underlines Robyn as not only an amazingly inventive teacher, but also speaks to a luminous feature of her poetics, an ability to activate and sustain multiple present tenses. In her newest book, Information Desk, an Epic, these immediacies rustle in fraught spontaneity. The now of making a poem, the now of a vacuum cleaner delivery that interrupts this making, the now of deep memory in which plays a doll with toxic, melting face. These poems move with an agile syntax that is both precise and elusive, as long, grammatically intricate sentences defer their endings over the junctures between line breaks and stanzas. Reading Robyn's work now, I've been thinking about Angela Layton's writings on how poetry, at its best, shifts the very grammar of thought. My experience reading Robyn's poems is one of such shifting, where one thought seems like it's taking focus only to be supplanted by another, so that, in this generative deferral, there's a quickening of thought itself. Information Desk, which draws from Robyn's time staffing the information desk at the Met, is one of an extraordinary catalog of 4, which also includes the books Worth, Revolver, and A Woman of Property. Together, these think through a thick expanse of ideas and information. Anxieties of zoonotic contagion in motherhood, histories of empire, the machinations of high fashion houses, insect ousters, and visual art. In an interview, Robyn said, "Curation as an art form in itself has most informed me. Of course, at museums, I'm moved by so many individual works, but it's the crosstalk between seemingly disparate objects that really inspires me." Responders to Robyn's poems have alighted on this crosstalk as well, with Dan Chasen writing of A Woman of Property. These poems are interested in everything, possessing a capaciousness that, paradoxically, requires tight control. Kathy Park Hong speaks to this expansiveness in Information Desk too, writing that Robyn is astonishingly sibylline with her syllabic constraints. This dexterity of Robyn's stanzas exerts an intense pressure on their imaginative abandon, as well as their ethical scope, which takes in horizons of futurity and possibility. As Lynn Haginian once wrote of Robyn's poems, they seek out the value that suffuses horizons of desire. On a more biographical note, Robyn is a professor of English and creative writing and the director of the program for creative writing at the University of Chicago. She is also an editor of the small poetry press Canarium Books. Robyn was the recipient of the Joseph Brodsky Rome Prize and spent a year at the American Academy in Rome. Information Desk was a finalist for the Pulitzer and the National Book Critics Circle Award. Please join me in welcoming Robyn Schiff.
Oh, thank you so much, Gwen. That was so generous and really moving to me. And this room is sort of vibrating with constellations of poetry for me right now. There are heroes and friends who are heroes. And thank you for saying Lynn's name too, who was one of my teachers and very dear to me. When we were studying long poem together, I was working on this book, and I was very stuck, and I needed you and your peers and cohort, in that cohort, and just talking to students before this reading about how teaching can get us to the next poem, and that was a great example in my life of using the classroom to help me think through the next move. So thank you for that. And Oriana, there you are. That was beautiful. I especially loved that Linda Gregg poem. I love poems that refer to other poems, and I I've never read a poem that refers to almost remembering the poem, although I have that experience all the time, and it's haunting, and it was worse before the internet. Thank you so much for being here and for inviting me. Kathy, thank you so much for this invitation. The Holloway series is so important to me. I don't know how old it is, but in my sense of its reputation, it predates poetry. So being here and standing here in this house, in your house of poetry, is amazing to me. I already think through the things I've seen here and the conversations that I've already had in the last 24 hours, that Berkeley is absolutely magic. So you're all lucky to get to stay here. I'm just a visitor. Thank you for this generous introduction, so I don't really have to tell you too much about this book. So I'll just sort of drop you in. Sometimes students like to know what the form of something is, and I'll say that this is in a sort of warped version of syllabics, which I'd be very happy to talk about later. And I'll just jump in here. There was a cart we used to transport brochures from a storage closet to the desk. You had to steer it back through the Renaissance into a passage that opened in a dark medieval hallway through a door without a handle you backed into after opening one-handed with a key called the number 2 that was hanging from a ball-link chain around your neck. We talk a lot about death, my husband and I. I want to add to the utter absence of the weight that once seemed everlasting of the child asleep upon me that I can feel not feeling, which is the overtaking void, circumscribed exactly, the pressure at my nape of that ball-link chain when I bent down to insert the key and turn it, pushing the door open, and the glimmering insignificant beauty of the release of my neck as I withdrew key from lock, stood up, and entered. My mother swam in a man-made body called the Delta Reservoir near the Mohawk River outside Rome, New York. That was the intentional result of the engineered flooding of a village called Delta that had been developed into something more than just acreage by 2 men named Stark and Prosper. You are an American girl. Here you are in an American poem, getting in the American water. Let's go under together. I used to get nosebleeds from the pressure. I don't know that I want to get in the poem. There is a ladder, itself a salvage. Let's back down it slowly deep in the quiet American wing of the museum in darkness toward a new closet, not for storage, but installed for public viewing, a woman's wardrobe. Private folded things, ironed crisp as peeling an orange in sunlight, lit like a refrigerator in a dream with almost nothing in it. Who can stand before it and not divest? Stark and Prosper, starched and proper, stiff and angry, forced and entered, sorted and counted, stored and forgotten, a pull to bottom I associate with dream ending before awakening, not thoughtless, beyond thinking, end of recording, sound of the needle dragging the void. Why should we be afraid? Human consciousness far predates me oiling the mahogany handrail with my mere presence. Rembrandt, not Rembrandt. 1995 was the first special exhibition I attended as museum employee. Paste it with the proprietary edge of a paid informant. Submit everything to the binary. It had the stiff, infrared soul of connoisseurship. Rembrandt, not Rembrandt, that's the question. Posed it like a strobe with the typesetter's solidus, the forward slash, a force field between who did and who did not make it, without that indecisive human or Milton imposes between the given and the made. Eve withdrawing from Adam with such gardening tools as art yet rude, guiltless of fire had formed, or angels brought. Choose a side, poet. Which is it, Eve or God who forged the hoe? Forgery, 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 flash, flash, flash. I said to myself, if you have to ask, but I stood before each painting eating half shadow, umber, and ochre every day for a month of lunch hours trying to know. The handling of the built-up impasto is itself a valid argument against, writes the curator Walter Liedtke in the exhibition catalog, Forgery, and yet a few paintings over, Portrait of a Man, The Auctioneer. It is surprising how successful the unknown painter was in imitating Rembrandt's manner in the light effects of the sitter's left cuff. And so I came to love that cuff, its lace and dust, and love the wrist that cuff suggests, obscured here in the painting by the ledger the auctioneer is holding, on which the trembling value of what? Some cows suggests a field in mind where a calf moves in the shadow of a barn, the hot smell of manure and mulch, a bull. How much is it all worth? Self-portrait of the young artist as auctioneer with your checklist and radiant left cuff that Rembrandt couldn't have better lit. I see you. I think I touched that cuff and more at a keg party in Slonim Woods and sensed its tragic aptitude, counterpart to your dull right wrist, lacking the vision of an artist's truth. Is that the word, truth? Follower of Rembrandt, I followed you into the blue woods, but I changed my mind. There was a museum guard who would not leave me alone in the Rembrandt, not Rembrandt show. Like everyone, he used his breaks to flip through the large black binder of better jobs, human resources left out on a table for us, and was eventually transferred to the Department of Design to walk the collection with a power drill tightening the lucite fixtures that held brochures. He was peculiar, and I was afraid of him. When he asked if he could sit beside me in the employees' cafeteria, situated down a private access stairway beneath the small-scale models of a prosperous and tedious imagined hereafter, of a Middle Kingdom civil servant served by a labor force of affectless miniature ghosts trapped in menial afterlives on boats and gardens, slaughterhouses, cattle stables, and a cramped granary divided into two tight rooms, separating those hoisting sacks from scribal clerks squatting on the granary floor, recording each ounce of grain. I could not find my no. So down he put his tray, and we talked a while. He did something obscene, I don't remember what, with a red cherry tomato. 2 months later, he was led out of the museum in cuffs on a date rape charge, which seemed so new then, but as a phrase was coined in 1973, so technically is as old as me. We grew up together in the semi-finished basements of the suburbs, listening to the upstairs plumbing rush the shit of our fathers into the earth. Rembrandt, not Rembrandt, was a show about the audacity of no. It either is or it isn't, Rembrandt or not, but we both know, though I have to say it, there can be truth without vision. Call it confidence. You follow it out onto the ice with confidence, finding purchase on the surface in the boot ruts left by others, but it will never get me across a lake this size. My mother, a teenager more than half a century ago, on the telephone with a friend on a day like this, crystalline, indifferent, heard his little brother through the black receiver run, panting into the house, yelling that a littler sister yet had broken through. The ice was a figure when I started that thought, but it transformed to ground, which is the beginning of disaster, as ground gives way to the natural transitions of the states of matter, in this case, just above the solidus, the temperature below which a given substance, lake water, or my will, is solid. As a mark of punctuation, solidus descends toward us from the imperial Roman coin of nearly solid gold, also called a solidus, on the same downward spiraling staircase that brings sold to soldier, one who serves for pay. Such coins are on display today in Gallery 301, right outside the gift shop, but a debossed glass weight one could use to gauge debasement is too far away to help debate the worth. Did you consent in basements? Yes, no, circle one. I didn't know. And under the information desk, did you know? I would now, but I didn't how so long ago. Rembrandt, 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 not. From slurry to slip and back we go. Stand up, visitor. This is your hour. Here is your map. Choose your cradle, ancient Egypt to the right, ancient Greece to the left as the crow flies if the crow flew, but construction obstructs its course, so you'll see it strutting around, lost, making self-important cause at the temporary walls of empire. What do I mean, crow? The boy from SVA, the tourist, the teacher, the dramaturge, schoolgirl to whom the world has given such a small skirt and such a tall, cold stool. Who converges in the great hall with me today? Sometimes I work the lines handing out floor plans just to get out from inside the fact, but information is a movable desk. John F. Kennedy Jr. asked me late one afternoon, "What time is it?" And I had to tell him, "Not much left now. We worked closing soon." He stood there, throbbing like a metaphor, son of the 20th century whose vehicle was powered by props. The great poet once admonished me, "You are reducing history to anecdote." That's more than you ever did. Stop raising it up to myth. I would have liked to have stood in front of Washington crossing the Delaware, holding John John by the hand and told him I once saw it carved in a grain of rice. Afterward, I tucked that stoic in 80 yards of wine-dark imported European textile in the low-down bed in Gallery 709, salute goodnight medieval America, and close the high-post night curtain. In this lucid state of poem, I admit I'm having trouble envisioning the age of John John, mother or liaison, boy or man. Thomas Hart, whose bed we're in, arrived on this land on a ship named Desire. Who would identify with the mother country or dour country mother variety of Massachusetts witch, living apron she who used her hands to wipe her hands on, practical Ipswich wife to whom this bed was left, in this home willed father to son out from under her? Lying on the bed, I can feel the room's dependency, its depth, a percussive loyalty stomping out a fire, and with a little reach I can use my foot to twitch the awful oaken 4 centuries old cradle situated beside me. Imagine the oak tree overcoming the acorn tragic hunger hoarded by a rodent. Every tree is an exception. The sturdy wood has the self-regarding gloss of old cabinetry turned in anger, contrived squarely in defiance in the proportions of a coffin. Worse, the so-called cradle has a hood that leans a shadow on the empty. Every child thrives at the expense of someone else's, though this is just a poem on the subject of exhibition, a double-blind protection from statistics. Here I sing to John John, inside the cradle, inside this primary period, inside the period rooms, inside the American wing, inside this museum. I am mothering a small man, wifing a tremendous potential child, ovulating in the period room and full of it. Lust, avarice, spite, destiny, dynasty, lice. John Kennedy Jr. wants to know what time it is. That's the 20th century behind you, child man. You can hide inside my skirt, but it's a mini. What's coming's coming for you from the sky. There's a luminous noonday shine on the information desk, but it's artifice. The trustee's dining room glows above like an expensive minor afterlife. This morning I awoke to pounding deluge, a furious, heavenly manual typing outside my window that turned out to be just ice on the roof thawing, but I still call that rain. It from a lower ceiling than I thought, and I can lower my thinking yet to the museum sub-basement where rats mount a rotating permanent exhibition of excrement among the white marble B-side nudes and dated marble satyrs that may or may not ever see restoration or be seen above again. On the same topic of being, wash me in the dust on the back fender of a moving car is a traveling exhibition, and of the several ways a tree disperses seed, including by wind drift, as an arrow or parachute or powder, germinating afloat upon water in pockets of air like naturally occurring versions of the pontoons that land the de Havilland otter, ready to root riverside where the river takes them, clinging in infested feathers and matted or glossy or soft or not soft fur with the sad dignified, free-loading, no-regret barbs that inspired the marvels of Velcro, ground under the hooves and paws of anything that charges, burrows, claws, herds, stampedes, as lead leaps or wanders alone across or through or around rivers and ponds, woods, fields, and yellow acreage, Dickensian or like wired martyrs, self-detonating in circumstances beyond the limits of acceptable fiction, and then dispersed further, as in the case of common dog violet, whose small shrapnel gets scavenged by ants who spread it incredible relative distances away from the places the seed pods exploded by dropping a few here and here en route to their hills, blazing the earth in inadvertent pathways of dog violet further, inadvertently, ongoingly dividing through I don't know how many ages of homegoing delegates of I don't know how many ants, by the hoarding aforementioned of acorns by rodents or jays who are hunted by predators, or by the scattering of acorns by my son and his friends in circumstances that sometimes shock me, send me running outside to ask them to calm down, play gently, respect one another as girls seem to, though my sister and I were certainly cruel to each other and sometimes strategic. When we played with acorns, play had to do with dolls serving dolls from beautiful earthenware, Art Nouveau game dishes fabricated in the acorn shape of acorns, and was never just play with acorns themselves. Some birds in the thrush family eat a kind of vivid berry, encapsulating a tiny adamantine seed case requiring a hard grinding gizzard to wear it down, and passes through the mill of the thrush as through history, belittled, belittled, and belittled, until belittlement is the freedom awakening each seed in shit in the alert, procreative, natural state of revenge by which we will outnumber you. Time is the best maneuver. No better craftsman than the clock inside Heather, a seeding that insinuates into the future by investing in soil and being turned on by the temperature of fire, rolling above the moors like a hell-bent plow. Overwhelming, undergoing, what infrastructure shifts under this one? When I knew I was writing a really, really long poem, and I decided, very ironically, to call it an epic, I realized I needed a muse. So this long poem is interrupted by poems that are about the life cycle of certain wasps. So I'm going to read you a wasp poem, and then I'll check in on time and see if I'll have time for anything beyond that. I'm going to move this over here because I kind of can't see over it. This is a wasp muse called the oak gall wasp, and you'll learn a lot about its life cycle, and I apologize in advance if you're going to eat dinner after this. To the oak gall wasp. Something like a wooden pearl, what gall forms here? Irritation's gemstone on the oak leaf underneath I thought was a buried seed case, or oak-faced scrotum-like excrescence the oak tree seemed to make of itself, an extremist involved with power. For no reason, when we were girls plucking these woodland BBs from the branch to flick at the back fence, about so much unsuspecting, I was mistaken by dissemination meticulously more single-minded than the mere widest distribution of seed over the furthest expanse. As I follow American history, small and solitary, intravenously driven living syringe mainlined into the green vein of oak leaf to position with the earthly pulse of her otherworldly, self-sufficient, piercing ovipositor, her shimmering eggs, the oak gall wasp is un-American Mother of the Year. Patriotism, meet parasitism, a biochemical je ne sais quoi charms the redirection of the oak leaf's force to form a cradle for each minuscule egg, something like the way our human flesh scabs over. And not just any oak, Oak gall wasps overtaking an oak known as your own are implicit in every acorn, including the sprouting one you carried home, rolling slowly around the base of a wet Dixie cup your first grade teacher told you would, with patience, be as tall as you one day and capable in time of crushing you in bed. Unsentimental consequence of gravity, which is the consequence of the curvature of space-time, but what isn't? I sold the house behind which my son and I once planted such an acorn and even enclosed it in a pathetic ring of prefabricated fencing I fought counterclockwise against the coil to unspool off a metal roll like a robot fabric bolt to shield it from the orphan fawns. If that oak rises still, witness to the sleep of someone else now through an underestimated August storm, I do not know or in what health, but if rise it does, safe in her hyperbaric chamber, as some athletes sleep between stages on this Tour de France, there the gall wasp grows in my divestment. Such a fundamental hunger stirs in the oak gall dark. If you listen, you might hear her chew her way out of oak leaf where she incubates, encrypted in her first meal. Unless, and this is life on earth as much a miracle of drudgery and lust as you or me or the gall wasp, another even more strategic parasitic to the second power brood parasite wasp, oak injects with finer, more exacting ovipositor a second egg. The two sister together in the wasp world prenatal ritual juices, downloading the vital redirected principles of oak into their maturing, crackling bodies. You've been to sleepovers. Girls grow strong, touching each other's bodies with stories of mutual incrimination. What confidence betrayed then when duplicitous behind her back? To emerge, as we learned, wasps chew their exit through the gall, but in the case of a hosting wasp, she's compelled to stop by something most entomologists do not read enough Victorian novels to understand. Whether social dynamics are more or less legible to an outsider, I'm too far inside the gall to tell, since it was I who dug the hole, placed the acorn, shooed the beast, and waited for the oak to leave that the gall wasp could deposit there her egg, inspiring thus the oak to cradle it, that a second wasp could parasitize the parasite wasp, as is drawn out over several seasons of elaborate outmaneuverings in parish, parlor, and palace on the BBC. But this is an American transition of power. Don't look away. I don't want to end this poem bleeding, but the wasp does eat the wasp, and up through the top of her head, like the goddess she is, enters the hellscape. It's happening now. It happened, unless, that is, through the bedroom window where sleeps the child of someone else now, the beautiful oak I tenderly tended, already crashed. And I think I'll finish up by reading a little bit of part 3 of this book. Thank you very much for listening, being here, and all that. I find myself really nervous looking out at this particular audience. Sometimes on my break, I take my name tag off so no one know to ask anything of me, such as on the longest days of winter break in a slowly chilling voice reserved for when she'd had enough, my mother would say, "I'm not your mother," and I'd sprawl as she did in our living room across the only sofa in the museum, not cordoned off with red arousing rope like enormous nipple tassels of grief and lust, and read Balzac's Lily of the Valley under the moony portrait of Princess de Broye, an aged descendant of whom, staunch with flirtatious guilt, asked me at the information desk soon after opening on a day that wing was closed for special permission to see that ancestor she'd been told she so resembled, but whom she said she'd only ever seen in books, framed above a defunct mantle, regal in a long, cold gown, the infinite blue of sorrow and wealth. She is so noble as to have 4 necks, Start with the most conspicuous, around which gold shows her jugular how to throb. Then take the staircase one flight down to the throat of her wrist, encircled in a helix of a necklace of so many pearls, a mere bracelet is of insufficient breadth to bed the many oysters from whose recurring nightmares out they rolled, down with which we go when further lucent turning to ground level viewing of the naked body who stood for the princess, that the artist could, with the trademark accuracy of ice, drape over a true female anatomy. That killer silk to gaze into is to want to drown yourself. That's 3. Then rush all the way back up the staircase to recall in the tremble of the feather hair clip the retracted neck of the sub-Saharan marabou stork in flight, the undertaker bird, so called from behind its back. For how much those cloakish wings, the largest span of any land bird, look like a hunched Victorian death-dealing a cadaver, which it is, tuberculosis. Oh, princess, why don't I feel more for you, your early death, your blue dress everyone wants to taste, and the restrained sadness that droops your eyelids as if you're a little high or hiding something big and willing yourself not to scream. I want to love you too, but I'm too jealous of how your opera gloves, nonchalantly filled with having just been to the opera, are slung over the arm of the chair you're leaning on to reveal how your elongated, ungloved fingers taper into tips so attenuated you could pick a different lock with each and simultaneously enter 10 different exclusive realms of being, unlimited by time, gravity, birth, or money. I flew first class once, as we were transcending into oblivion, a rubber-gloved steward using a dot matrix printout of the manifest to correctly address each first-class passenger by name, tipped toward each of us a basket of what I thought were credit cards, like a reverse collection plate that turned out to be individually wrapped sanitary wipes, miraculously packaged, slick and glossy, containing a sheet as elegantly folded as an insect wing moistened by desire of angels, to purify ourselves against the armrests and whoever is seated in coach behind us, lulled in neutered chorus beneath the white noise of the fan's acceleration, velocity, and lift. Airspeed, altitude, trend, and Mach are determined by a coordination of a critical network of pressure-sensitive instruments, including an open tube system adapted from an 18th century French tool developed to measure rushing river water, through which airflow is gauged in flight, but into which, quickly on the runway, the mud she rolled into a globe and flew here from a nearby puddle, a keyhole wasp sculpts her secret nest. First, she evaluates potential. Is tube deep enough to conceal her egg? Sufficiently narrow, night enough to trust the future to emerge through? Wasp, so says this hollow, I am the yes that opens just for you. I have been gaping since the beginning of my shape, enduring the entrance of wind and rain and exhaust, awaiting your investment. Thus, keyhole wasp drops into the shaft, a single egg followed by one single slow-breathing paralyzed grub. Then, in high literary style described by Poe, uses the mud she gathers to wall them in together. Knowing what we know of privacy and hunger, I want to watch this quarantine tighten around this living theater as much as you, but with cabin doors secured, handheld electronics switched to airplane mode, and stowed items overhead beginning their irrevocable fated shift. Takeoff commences, and the small universe of that wasp nest comes to constitute such blockage of airflow through the tube it's lodged in that fatal miscalculations of airspeed bring the whole craft down. Avert your eyes and think about luggage, things of this world, how I want to hold and count you. Heaps, piles, stocks, troves, drifts, reserves, reservoirs, packs, pecks, stacks, wagons, freights and tracks, roots and goods, dams and locks. The descendant of the princess is leaning toward me, whose family still owns those very gloves and shawl and jewels and chair, pets them formally somewhere in Paris, in their acid-free storage chamber with an air of ritualized kink. Those props rendered coolly in paint, as to seem untransformed by art, where light fathoms life, silk by leather, by flesh, by feather, invoiced an inventory catalog of stalking, herding, breaking, breeding, harvesting, hunting, cutting, plucking, mining, exacting, and importing. That portrait is reared over the desk toward me, so she was on the side of information and issued her request. And easy, yes, grants access, but how to map a route? I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
So we have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So please raise your hand and Kathleen will come around with the mic. Okay, thank you.
Can we talk about the syllabics?
Sure, I thought you'd never ask. Okay. I guess now that I asked for it, I sort of don't know how to say it. I've been writing in syllables for a really long time. And I was just telling this story last night. My dear friend who was here last year as your Holloway Poet in Residence, I'm not sure what it's called, but Tim Wood dared me when I was a very baby poet to write in syllabics, because I had been obsessively reading Marion Moore, and I felt like I was quite derivative and didn't know how to get out from under her. And he said, I'm going to paraphrase, but the only way out is through. He said, write in syllabics and see what happens, really touch her, right? So I did, but the problem with syllabics is that they're really addicting, and I never stopped. And I mean, Marion Moore is basically my highest god, but I think everybody should be writing in syllabics, not just Moore and me. And there are many poems in all of my books that are in some strict syllabic forms. This book is in something a little bit different, and the usual syllabic mode is, plosives, is to count how many syllables per line. So this is what Moore did. The first line might be 11 syllables, the second line might be, 18, and then 3, and then 9, or whatever. She would keep rolling that through the poem and repeating this form. But in this poem, I wanted something a little bit more fluid, something that would both be as generative as I know syllabics to be. All of my poems, maybe all poems, but all of my poems are about time. And the unit of the syllables, kind of like counting down. It's basically a second, right? So being in sync with time and counting syllabics is very different than anything that moves toward free verse or even toward essential meters. But I wanted something more fluid and something that would feel differently free. So instead of syllabic lines, it's a syllabic stanza. So each stanza, except for the wasp poems, which are their own world, is the same amount of syllables. And they begin in the amount of syllables that corresponds to the age I was when I started the book. So if you count how many syllables, nobody should do this, but you'll know the age I was. Of course, I'm a Lynn Heginian student, so a relationship with form is fascinating. It's a law, but it's also fraught, and there is a sense of integrity, but a sense of play that has to also come up. So I didn't know how long it would take to write this poem. I knew it would be more than a year, because I've never written nobody writes a book in a year. But I didn't realize how long it would take, and I gave myself a syllable for every birthday for quite a long time. And under the influence of Lynn, I decided I could use that syllable, and then another syllable, and then another syllable, kind of however I wanted as I was revising. So I would go back to earlier stanzas that may have been, let's say, 45 syllables, and I could add one or two. Or I could write something that had been more syllables, but in the course of revising it, I could remove a syllable if I felt like I needed to in the course of rewriting. No, I'm telling you all this. Nobody should work through this reading the poem, but these are the generative games that poets play, as you know, because you're poets, in order to keep the engine moving, I think. Did I miss anything about syllables that I should say? Thank you.
Robyn,
Hi.
I don't think this is working.
I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much for your reading. I was wondering if you could talk about the decision to call the poem an epic.
Even if it is ultimately in an ironic sense. And this is sort of what point that emerged, how it changed the compositional process that it did, and your overall vision for the poem.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if you all heard the beginning of that question, and it's about the word, why would I call it an epic, even if it's ironic, and what did that offer the poem? It was a little bit of a joke, really. Pretty much every book I've written, the title has been some kind of joke to myself. And I think that having a little bit of an ironic distance, it helps me not take myself too seriously or take this very sacred art too seriously so that I can enter it. But I really was asking myself, like, what would a man do at this point in his career? I've written a couple of books, I do love a long poem. He'd probably write an epic. And I thought that was very, very funny. So I was like, hey, yeah, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to call it that, and it's going to be full of all the trouble of, an origin and the presumption of origin that such a word holds. Once I knew I had this as a subtitle and a form, I knew, and then there was really no way of getting away from this, this is how I write, but I knew it was going to be funny in ways that probably I only know, winking to myself, but there's something very humorous to me about the form. Although I take the long form, the female epic, very, very seriously. Some, like Midwinter Day is, I don't know who I'd be without that book. I don't know if it was ever self-consciously called an epic, but I call it one, or so much of Gwendolyn Brooks, long poems and series, Anyhow.
Robyn, thanks for your beautiful reading. I was wondering if you could talk about the title and what, the experience of, did you work at the Met Museum, at the information desk, and what was it about that experience that inspired you to write this long, inspiring epic? And maybe you could say a little bit more about being the point person for information.
Yeah, my first job out of college, I temped for a month or something, and then I realized, having graduated from college, that all I wanted to do, all I was equipped to do with my education, but all I really wanted to do was go to the museum. And I figured out a way, and there was this is so long ago, that when one wanted a job, you looked in the newspaper for it. And in the newspaper, there was a call for guards to work at the Met, and I was like, this is what I want to do. I absolutely need to go to the Met every day. And I went and interviewed for a job to be a guard, and learned from the head of security that the school of hiring had passed, that they interviewed me as, the appointment existed, but they hired all the guards that they could use at that moment, but did I want to interview for a different job? And then he handed me a binder with a job description in it, which was sit at the information desk. And it was life-changing, and I got to sit at the middle of that great hall and tell people where to go to the bathroom for a long time and go into that collection constantly, and also was tasked with, somehow being an apologist for the Western world. All of this collecting, which, as we know now, this history is a very complicated one. Nobody was talking about that then, but we all felt it. We just didn't have, we just weren't, it wasn't in a conversation, it was underneath. So just the sort of feelings that I had there, the remarkable awe the sublime every day, every single day, but then also the sort of class encounter also, the kind of, like the difference between working there at the info desk, or being a curator, or being a trustee, being in a place where there were restaurants where I could afford nothing on the menu on my pay. These kinds of class encounters that then brought with them gendered encounters as well. So I knew, I was already a poet. I just graduated from college, and in my downtime, I was reading Elizabeth Bishop at the desk and bringing her to the bathroom. and I knew that there was poetry. I'm so sorry. I knew that there was poetry there for me. I just didn't know how to do it yet, and it took a long time. And I landed after like a couple of books and then so I had a sabbatical coming and some time on my hands, and I thought, well, I'm going to go to the Met with my family. I'm going to embed in New York, where I don't live anymore, and I'll go to the museum every day, and I'll have this ekphrastic experience that and then that's just not how it all works. The pandemic happened. Well, first I was right. I started this book. And it was harder than I thought. I looked forward to the sabbatical. Pandemic happened, and I wasn't going to New York. I was sitting in an empty room. And that's when the book started to be about memory and personal memory and emotional wandering, much more than physical wandering. And I would stare at the map of the Met on my computer and just try to remember. That's where it comes from.
Better be good.
Hi, Robyn. Well, thank you so much for your reading. I love the way that you talk about syllabics. I love more, and I love syllabics as well. And,
that makes two of us.
And I was wondering, and how you talked about the form. And one of the reasons that I love form so much is that it provides a path, and it's this sort of constant series of surprises that I never would have come to if I hadn't been in the midst of the constraint. So I'm wondering, within this, if there were any standout kind of moments of wonder or surprise or veering this way and that the form of the syllabic offered you, and maybe you thought, oh, I never would have gotten here had I not been thinking about syllables and constraint in the way that it was pulling me through the poem.
Thank you for that. That's a great question, and I love your word, path. Very much so, form that it was because this is a book about wandering. This is very much a path. I've had the kinds of revelations that you're talking about, that where you come up against form and it forces something out of you. Syntax in particular, but it's usually been in previous books. I'm going to get back to this one in a second. But when I know I've got a line that's coming up and it's 7 syllables long, and I've said, I wonder if there's just a perfect word that's going to fill all 7 syllables, and this is, it's going to push both my content and my syntax, and I've felt that wall push me in many, many ways. Because the crisis of syllable counting and the crisis of the second was so personal in this book, because it was always my birthday every time I sat down to write, and I was writing my age and very self-aware of the growth of my own son throughout the course. He shows up at many different ages, but I'm still counting syllables, and the fluidity of the form, instead of it being based on line, it's being based on stanza, and then stanzas not necessarily and almost never actually being end-stopped. This sort of continuing, pulsing thing, it's very generative for me. So in that way, the generative push of the syllables very much shaped the book. But I think what happened in this book, because of the more fluid syllabic commitment, was I'm always digressive, but the digressions were much bigger. I just felt like I had more room because I wasn't accountable at the line. I was accountable at the stanzaic unit. So it just opened, and maybe not for the first time in my writing life, but for the first sustained time, I found myself what I'll call sewing. That being on the surface, or being underneath the poem, writing in the worlds of the poem, deep in memory, getting the scene right, and then like the stitch comes up and I'm like, whoa, I'm standing here writing a poem. And the syllables and the fluidity of the syllables allowed for me to surface and go down and thinking about syllables as now, now, now. Like every single syllable carries the weight of now. So very, very, very generative form for me. And I love poems that are self-consciously aware of their own writing, like James Schuyler saying, oh, I just had a pop and my fingers are sticky. And he's like right in the middle of the poem. So I love playing with that dynamic. Thanks for that question. Should we call it a day?
Yeah. If that's all, let's give another round of applause for Robyn's amazing reading. And I just want to remind you, books are for sale in the back. Okay. Bye-bye. Have a good night.